Hi there, it's David Birch again, Quantum Economics, Independent Strategy. Today, I want to talk to you about a wooden table. Now, when you look at a wooden table, you probably don't get very excited. I'm reminded of a few lines from a Restoration drama where a maid tells her mistress she's going to resign, and the mistress says, "I'm going to be brokenhearted. I depend on you so much." And the maid replied, "Yes, as you do upon that table. You are fond of it because you know it will always be there in the morning, and you rely upon it for the same reason." Now, in a sense, that's how we think about the future and how we think about the past and how we connect the two through assuming that the past will be replicated in the future. However, if I was to take that table to bits and put it in a carbon map of its molecules, you would not recognize it. If I were to go further and break it down into subatomic particles, whizzing around as they do, you would no longer have the impression of the stability of a table or something you could count upon or even understand. And that's the nature of quantum physics. Now, what I want to do, by way of a recap, is to explain how quantum physics is related to quantum economics. Now, quantum economics is not quantum physics because they are not replicated and connected in that way. The point about quantum economics is you can take a lot of lessons from quantum physics and you can say, well, if human beings are made up that way, and economics is all about human behavior, and forecasts are all about predicting the statistical result of that human behavior, then if the human beings and everything they interact with in the first place are governed by the law of quantum physics, then they are certainly not governed by the laws of Newtonian gravity. Let me give you an example of that. In the beginning of this year, it seems a long time ago, the consensus forecast from 7 major institutions, all of course staffed by worthy people who make worthy forecasts, was that this would be the last year or the second last year of the bull market, which would be driven by earnings rather than reduction in interest rates. But nothing would really happen to inflation to upset that happy course of interest rates. And interest rates would not go down, they'd more or less stay where they are. And double-digit returns in equities would be driven by the earnings. Now, as you know, things didn't turn out like that. Our own forecasts, which are quantumly based in the way that we think about them, said there would be a war in Ukraine, and it would lead to massive supply-side shock and geopolitical disruption globally, with the world breaking down into increasingly 3 mutually detesting parts. The Russian-Chinese part, the so-called Western democratic part, though it's too narrow a definition for liberal political thinkers and the rule of law societies like that, is too narrow. And then, of course, there's the emerging market world of total indifference, which is led by places like Brazil and India and Indonesia, which really think that what's going on in Ukraine is not an attack by Russia, not just on Europe, not just on America, but on the whole idea of a rule-based world order. Now, let's break that down a little bit. Economic forecasts are basically done like this. On one side of the equation, you have 1 + 1, and on the other side of the equation, you have 2. 2 is what is going to happen. 1 + 1 is what always has happened. Now, the reason why that never works, and 1 + 1 is never equal to 2, is only 2 simple reasons. The first is that another 1 or -1 or -1 billion comes along and attaches itself to the left-hand side of the equation, and we didn't anticipate that happening because it never happened before. And the second is that the value of those variables on the left-hand side of the equation change and are no longer 1 and 1 like they were in history, but are some other value which does not add up to 2. That's the difference between quantum economic forecasting and historical forecasting based on predetermined or at least historically correlated results. Now, of course, it takes a quantum computer and a lot of originality to actually forecast in that way. And the number of variables is much, much greater than anything you can put on your laptop. But it is not necessary to be able to do that in order to be able to think like that. And what we are saying is if you look at the economic forecasts this year and you look at the economic reality, well, profits should have disappeared around the S-bend in the loop, sometimes called the toilet in other uses of language. Why would that have happened? It would have happened because inflation soared, wages soared, productivity collapsed, unit labor costs exploded far more than output prices. But actually, if you look at what actually happened to profits, they were still growing at 17 to 18% in the second quarter of this year, which goes to show that the economic variables don't add up anyway. Of course, you can take other economic variables and squeeze them around to suit your version of reality and make them add up. But the point I am making is not only does the past not correlate particularly well to the future, but also that our own classic, or it's probably the wrong word, but our own traditional economic values don't add up either. I've just explained to you about profits. I can also explain to you about inflation. The most egregious statement probably I've heard about inflation from somebody who is most definitely hooked on historical correlations is from the president of the ECB, Lagarde, yesterday, who said inflation came out of nowhere. Inflation did not come out of nowhere. It came out of perfectly justifiable causes. It came out of Russia. It came out of global disruption. It came out of the end of globalization. And above all, it came out of central banks printing too much money and governments spending too much money. And it ain't going to stop. That is the first of our podcasts in this series, which actually takes you back over what quantum economics is and what it is not. I hope you find it useful. The next podcast will actually deal with the Chinese meeting, Congress of the Communist Party, and why it is so vital for our theory that the world is breaking up into mutual detestable parts, and what this actually means for everybody out there, not just for investors, for everybody and your kids. Goodbye, good night, and don't forget to turn off the lights.